It is Thursday evening on this August 9th, 2012, and there are 1, 2, 3, and 4 tropical systems on the map in the Atlantic. Ernesto is on its way out as it starts to fade over Mexico. The remnants of Florence are not going to do anything as it moves off toward Bermuda, but we've got newly classified Tropical Depression 7 and another very powerful wave exiting the coast of Africa. Tropical Depression 7 has 35 mile per hour sustained winds. It's moving toward the west very quickly at 20 miles per hour, very much like Tropical Storm Ernesto, and it's also forecast to take the same track over the next 5 days, while passing over the Lesser Antilles near St. Lucia Saturday night, and then by day 5 approaching Jamaica as a moderate or strong tropical storm. Several members of the 0Z tropical model suite are taking Tropical Depression 7 toward the northwest into the West Atlantic, although many of these models are likely developing TD7 too quickly, and to the contrary, a weaker system would promote a more westerly track, and this is what some of the more reliable models not shown here are suggesting, and TD7 will likely make it into the Western Caribbean within the next 5 to 7 days. The 18Z GFS ensemble members, although there is some disagreement, do heavily support the more western track into the Western Caribbean, and the more northerly solutions can be discounted. The depression could strengthen into a tropical storm over the next 24 to 48 hours, and this is what is being suggested by nearly all of the intensity models, but we strongly believe that many of these models are being too aggressive within the first 48 to 72 hours. You've got some taking the storm to in excess of 50 to 60 knots toward the 72 to 96 hour forecast period, and with the upper level shear expected to increase during this time, the models are more than likely incorrect. This is a wide satellite view showing Tropical Storm Ernesto starting to fizzle out across central and southern Mexico, while Tropical Depression 7 continues to move westward toward the Caribbean. Tropical Depression 7 is not very well organized this evening, and with the last few frames of the visible satellite for today, you can see that the surface circulation is partially exposed to the north and to the west of some of the strongest convection in cloud tops, and TD7 is having a struggle in terms of organization because it's trying to detach itself from the intertropical convergence zone, and the ITCZ does enhance convection, but once the system begins to pull away, it has to start creating some of its own convection in order to survive. Tropical Depression 7 is having a difficult time in generating its own convection, and that is because it's dealing with a lot of dry air associated with the Saharan air layer, and the Saharan air layer is stretching all the way into the eastern Caribbean this evening, and we've also got an upper level low situated to the east of Bermuda, and this upper level low is forecast by all of the dynamical models to shift southward over the next 72 hours, and this is going to enhance the southwest vertical wind shear as the depression approaches the Lesser Antilles. So although a tropical depression or tropical storm landfall cannot be ruled out in the eastern Caribbean, it is nearly impossible for this system to intensify into a hurricane, as the dry air and shear will continue for at least another 3 to 4 days. In fact, there is a much greater chance of the system at least temporarily weakening to a tropical wave axis. The latest wind shear charts show the upper level ridging in the eastern Atlantic trying to spread westward along with the depression, but immediately toward the west we see increasing westerly vertical wind shear. You can see it better with the color representation. The wind shear values immediately to the east of Barbados are in excess of 25 to 30 knots, and the wind shear values may only increase near the Lesser Antilles over the next 72 to 84 hours. The Central Atlantic view gives us another look at Tropical Depression 7, and we are going to go more in depth with the latest dynamical models in just a moment, but we also need to mention newly formed Tropical Disturbance or Invest 93L as it's beginning to exit the coast of Africa. The Hurricane Center is giving this one a 30% chance of development into a depression within the next 2 days, and as you can see, it does have a fairly healthy low to mid-level circulation, and it will be interesting to see how this wave holds up as it moves deeper out into the Atlantic. Preliminary model guidance for Tropical Disturbance 93L is showing more of a northerly track with this feature, and that is not too much of a surprise considering just how far north the system is leaving Africa. The latest 12Z run of the CMC model is showing Tropical Depression 7 continuing westward, but then with more of a bend toward the northwest toward day 5 and day 6, and this is very similar to its initial forecast of Ernesto when Ernesto was in the same general position, and we can expect the CMC to trend more toward the south over the next 1 to 2 days. The CMC model is more than likely developing the depression too quickly over the next 48 to 72 hours, and a stronger system in the short term will feel the nudging impacts of a mid to upper level trough over the central Atlantic, and that would help to induce more of a northerly component in the motion, but we are not expecting all that much in the way of strengthening, so a more westerly track is to be expected over the next 5 days. Based on the upper level wind shear forecast, you can see the reason why we are not expecting much in the way of development. Here is the upper level low located well to the north, but by 54 hours you can see that it's slanting itself more toward the southwest, and as we go into day 3 it's only moving closer to where the tropical system would be located, and by this time it should be located directly over the Lesser Antilles, and at this time it will more than likely be encountering very strong southwest vertical wind shear. It may even open up into a tropical wave axis, but if it can survive the shear, it's more than likely going to move into a more favorable environment once in the central or western Caribbean, and much like Ernesto, we're going to have to monitor the guidance for more signs of this potential. The Saharan air layer is also going to remain a negating factor in the Atlantic until the tropical disturbance moves more toward the west into the Caribbean, and toward day 5 and day 6, as TD7 is forecast to move closer toward Cuba, it's also forecast to move into an increasingly moist environment. The 18Z operational run of the GFS is also supporting the more westerly track, as you can see the depression moving more toward the west throughout the forecast period. The only difference between the GFS and the CMC at this point is there's really nothing left of the tropical system in the GFS by day 7. Also, by day 7 we see that it's developing the Coast of Africa disturbance, that being 93L, but if it were to strengthen, it is likely to turn more toward the north in the face of many troughs. If we look at the 300 millibar vorticity analysis from the GFS starting at 54 hours, we can see the upper level low, but also the tropical upper tropospheric trough extending into the western Caribbean, and the GFS is keeping the trough at least somewhat in place across the Caribbean for the next 5 to 6 days. You can still see it draped across eastern Cuba and Haiti, and this is the likely reason why the GFS is not even maintaining Tropical Depression 7 as a potential system of interest. Having said that, these upper level shear and vorticity forecasts are always subject to change, and if this upper level trough were to begin lifting more toward the north or weaken, then we could see a completely different upper level picture outlined to the south of Cuba. Third and finally, this is a look at the ECMWF, and the ECMWF is trending more toward the west with TD7. This is something that we said would happen last night. We were buying into the more westerly GFS and CMC solutions, while the European was showing a track to the north of Puerto Rico over the next 10 days. As you can see though, the European is now fully in line with the other two dynamical models, and by 120 hours or day 5, you really can't even make out the system anymore because it is showing weakening, as is also indicated by the GFS, but it does have that westerly track through the next 7 days. The European model is also showing the strengthening of the African wave into a tropical depression or tropical storm, but as noted before, as it does begin to intensify, it's going to be very likely to turn more toward the north and away from land. So the only real threat over the next week or so in the tropics will be from TD7, and all interests in the Lesser Antilles should be preparing for a tropical depression or tropical storm landfall if the system can hold together, and if there's going to be any significant potential, it would not be until it makes it into the central or western Caribbean, and that is if it's still intact at this time, and if the GFS begins to show a more favorable shear pattern. So that's all for now, but keep it tuned to 28storms.com and the Hurricane Tracker app as we continue to follow all tropical disturbances that threaten land throughout the course of hurricane season 2012.